What would our world look like if equality before the law wasn't just a principle, but a lived reality for everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About Human Rights, where we explore the rights that uphold dignity, fairness, and justice for all. I'm your host, Julz Allender, representing the California chapter of Youth for Human Rights International, where we aim to enlighten and equip young people with the knowledge of their human rights as outlined in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, inspiring them to stand up and secure these rights for themselves and others. As you know, for each show, we like to take up one right and try to broaden your understanding of how this right is important to you and your loved ones. And for today's show, we will be taking a look at human right number 7, we're all equal before the law, which states, all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. Let's take a look at a short video about this specific human right.
Different words describe different people. But in the eyes of the law, there's one that fits us all. Human right number 7. We're all equal before the law. What are human rights? Find out at youthforhumanrights.org.
Let's examine these ideas a little more closely. What does protection of the law really mean? It's a phrase you'll find in human rights documents, in court decisions, even in everyday debates. But what does it actually mean for you and me? At its core, protection of the law means this. The law isn't just a set of rules to punish wrongdoing. It's a shield, a promise that the system of justice stands to protect every single individual equally, fairly, and without discrimination. Now let's take it word by word. Protection means safety, a safeguard against harm. Law means the framework of rules we agree to live by. Together, protection of the law means no one is left outside that shield. Think about it like this. You're in school and someone shoves you against the lockers. You can fight back, or you can turn to a teacher, the counselor, the rules of the school. When those rules are applied fairly, that's protection of law in action. But when rules are ignored or applied to some but not to others, that protection breaks down. The idea is not new. Ancient codes like Hammurabi's were designed to stop chaos and create order. In the year 1215, the Magna Carta limited the power of kings. In the 1700s, John Locke argued that rights are natural. Life, liberty, property, and government exist to protect them. In 1948, after World War II, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights declared all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. The idea has been with us for centuries, but it's still being tested today. So what makes up protection of the law? Equality. Everyone is treated the same, no one above and no one below. Due process. You get a fair trial, a fair hearing. Access to justice. Laws only matter if you can use them. Non-discrimination. The law protects everyone, regardless of race, gender, religion, or background. We've seen moments in history when protection of the law came alive. The U.S. Supreme Court case Brown versus Board of Education struck down school segregation. The civil rights movement demanded that laws apply to all. The women's suffrage movement won equal voting rights, but we've also seen the opposite. Apartheid in South Africa, where laws deliberately excluded most of the population. Segregation and discrimination that denied millions of the shield of the law. You might ask, does this really matter to me? The answer is yes. When a student with disabilities gets equal access to education, that's protection of the law. When cyberbullying leads to new rules about online safety, that's protection of the law. When your personal data is safeguarded from misuse, that's protection of the law. It's not distant, it's not abstract, it's here in daily life. Without protection of the law, the strong dominate the weak. The rules become a game only some have to follow. Imagine a basketball game where half the players follow the rules and half don't. That's not a game anyone wants to play, and that's not a society anyone wants to live in. So today, remember this. Protection of the law isn't a luxury. It's not a privilege. It is a right. It's the idea that you, me, and everyone else deserve the shield of justice, equally, fairly, always. Because without it, freedom is fragile, and with it, freedom has a fighting chance. And my guest today is Tyler Press of the Public Law Center. The Public Law Center is a pro bono law firm that provides access to justice for low-income residents of Orange County and across California. So I'd like to welcome Tyler to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So let's start off and just tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into this field.
So I have known my whole life that I wanted to be in public interest law, that I wanted to be representing folks who otherwise could not afford an attorney. And so I went to college and then to law school to meet that goal. And upon graduating from law school, I returned to Los Angeles, where I had grown up and started working as an Equal Justice Works AmeriCorps Fellow, representing low-income veterans in LA County. And then from there, I have moved my way across some different organizations, but always serving that population. And now I'm at Public Law Center, where I manage our legal team of about 35 attorneys and about 30 support staff who represent low-income residents of Orange County in their civil legal cases.
That's quite a team.
Yeah.
Awesome. Just out of curiosity, you'd mentioned that you always knew that this is something that you wanted to get into. And it struck with me because I always knew what I wanted to do from a very young age. I wanted to help people. And so I'm just curious if something had sparked that for you or what kind of made you push in that direction.
I think it came from my family, from my parents. My grandparents were plaintiffs in a non-discrimination case that went to the Supreme Court in the 50s and 60s, Tillman versus Wheaton Haven Pool Association, and they were the other named plaintiffs in the case where they had moved into a development that had a community pool, but because they were Black, they were told that they could not join the community pool. And along with the Tillmans, who were a Jewish family, who were also living in the association and told they couldn't join the community pool, they sued to get access to that. And so that's the family that I came from. And it really has, grown up with me. And as an adult, I realized that, the law is such a great mechanism to help fight for equality that's where that led me to.
Yeah, what a story. Mm-hmm. That's excellent. So tell us a little bit more about the organization that you're with.
Yeah, so Public Law Center is Orange County, California's pro bono law firm. So in the United States, law is divided into civil side and criminal side. Criminal cases are ones where the end result of the case could result in imprisonment. But we are on the civil side, which means none of our cases result in imprisonment, but you can lose some really important things doing in a civil case. You can lose your housing and get evicted. You can lose your immigration case and get deported. You can lose your child's custody of your child. So all of those things are on the civil side are as important, if not more important in some instances, to what happens in a criminal case. You could end up with a fine, right? And
Right.
Losing your houses can be much worse, but there is no right to an attorney in a civil case. And so what we do is we are representing folks. We are funded through state funds, local county funds, private donations. We're a nonprofit 501c3 that helps folks in these types of cases who otherwise could not afford an attorney.
Yeah, great point. I didn't even think with that. In a civil suit, you're not appointed an attorney if you can't afford one, right? So, awesome. And in terms of the work, I mean, I could come up with my own idea of why it is important, but from a legal standpoint and from your standpoint, being in the field for so long, why is it important of what you guys do, especially relating to like the intro in terms of, and you had mentioned growing up and your grandparents got into the case where we're talking about race, religion, background. Sometimes the law isn't upheld to some of those individuals.
Yeah, the thing that is really frustrating about the law is that it's really complicated. And so for most folks who have a legal problem, they don't know how to resolve it. They don't have the tools. And that means they don't access the system. And so in a major type of case that we take is debt collection. People who are, filed lawsuits against them because they owe debts, and it could lead to they're getting their wages garnished by, their employer basically sends money directly to the debtor. And in 90% of those cases, the person gets the lawsuit served on them and then they don't respond because they don't know how. They just don't access the system. In a large majority of those cases, if the person has an attorney, they actually have really good defenses. They could fight the system. They could protect their wages, but because they don't know how to access the system, they never engage. And that's what access to justice really is. It's being able to meaningfully engage with the system. And without organizations like Public Law Center, a large swath of people are just not able to access the system.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, and I haven't come across the cases and the individuals, but you have. But I think the important, at least what stood out to me, is access the system, right? Because I think when you don't know, and like you had mentioned, it is very complicated, and it's written in such a manner that, even to me, sometimes it's hard to understand. And so your first reaction is, well, I don't know. And maybe I'll get in more trouble. Maybe it'll get worse if I look deeper into this. But then getting the access and the knowledge, right? When someone gets knowledge, it can give them more control over the situation. And I'm not sure if you have found that with the individuals that you work with, where there's a little bit of relief, like, oh gosh, I didn't know that this actually worked this way, or unknowingness.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time doing education of our clients while we are representing them. So I'll just use the example of an eviction. Someone comes to us with an eviction and they see this huge stack of paper. They don't know what it means. They're very confused. We help them file the answer, the actual paperwork that they need to make sure that they don't immediately lose their house 10 days later. But along with that, we explain the system and the process to them. We tell them, what they need to, what kind of evidence they need to bring. What does that even mean to have evidence and present it to a judge? What happens, when you go to court? And by explaining the process, we help that person. There's millions of people in Southern California who are eligible for our services based on income. And like I said, our organization is about 75 people. So we can't help everyone. But what we try to do is empower those that touch us so that they understand the system and, can navigate it on their own. We're obviously representing as many people as we can. But the other part is we go through this system, and oftentimes our clients then go home and they teach their neighbor what we taught them. And that's so important, because then the knowledge is spreading, and it's not just this mystery of what is an eviction? What does it mean to go to court? No, they know, okay, I stand here, I bring my paperwork so that I can prove to the judge what I'm saying is true. We go through all of the steps in that process to really help people empower themselves.
Yeah. Do you think sometimes it's used as a fear mechanism?
Absolutely. The law is complicated even as an attorney, let alone if you don't fully understand, or you have a low reading level, or in United States, if English is your second language, all of the court paperwork is going to be in English. All of those things can be barriers. And so people use the law as a kind of a threat to keep people, in line to do what they want. We see that in housing cases. They're like, oh, if you don't do blah, 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 even though they're not required to, I'm going to, serve an eviction on you. And so that's a threatening tool that people use. And letting them know what their rights are, how they can assert those from their landlord is really, really important.
Yeah, and I think also too, sometimes in everyday conversation, even if it's not to the level of an eviction, someone, if you have a disagreement maybe with a business or an individual you worked with, and they go, well, I talked to my attorney, right? And if you have an unknowingness, you're like, well, okay, well, I better drop it 'cause, I don't want to go to jail, and I surely don't have the money to pay, right? So things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so how does this tie in, and why isn't it important in relationship to human rights?
So equal protection under the law is an essential human right. And so this being able to access the system, without access, that equal protection isn't there. So you can say you have equal protection, everyone is equal under the law, but if there are large swaths of the population who cannot actually access that, that's in fact not equal protection. And so that's really why it's, essential for everyone to be able to access the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure what your background is in this next question, and if it's relatable or not, but obviously we're in the United States and in Southern California. But from your expertise in the years that you've been in, and maybe you have experience or know people, but when we talk about the world, right, and the different nations, is this common in different nations?
Yes, I think that in most nations that I know of, to become a lawyer, you have to have this specialized education, which really is a barrier. In the United States, it's a 4-year bachelor's degree plus 3 years of law school, and then you pass a test to become a lawyer. There's a lot of hurdles, and that means that most people are not going to have that expertise. And that is the same. The processes differ from country to country, but there is some kind of specialized education that's required in most countries that I know of to be a lawyer and to represent people in these systems. And so because that barrier kind of exists in most places, that means the access to justice issue also exists most places.
Yeah, it would make sense. I mean, I have no idea, but just looking, you go out, in the United States, we run into it a lot, and I know law is different from nation to nation, but, more or less. Great. And then, so tell us a little bit, you've mentioned who you serve a little bit, but is there any more you can add to that on who specifically could reach out or should reach out or could benefit from your services?
Yeah, so in the United States, there are programs like mine in every single state. Civil legal aid exists in every single state. And each civil legal aid that is a nonprofit, they're going to have some kind of income eligibility. So for us, it's based on the HUD median income, which really means if you are low income based on your county, then you get our services for free. So you get screened, and that's the only criteria for us is are you low income? Because the idea is if you have high income, then you can pay for an attorney on your own. But practically speaking, the majority of Public Law Center's clients speak a language other than English. The majority of Public Law Center's clients are women. We have a high percentage of clients that are victims of domestic violence. And we have a high percentage of clients who don't have a high educational background, right? They're part of why they're in the system, or even maybe why they're low income, is because they haven't had a lot of opportunity. And so we really strive to be accessible to all people. We provide our services in using translation services for any language that we need. And so anyone who needs our services should be able to access them.
Excellent. And are you able to share some of the successes and wins that your clients have had in reaching out to you?
Yeah, so we have 8 different practice areas, and so there's wins across all of them. But what I'll talk about our family law team works primarily with survivors of domestic violence, and so people who are in really tough situations. And we collaborate with a women's shelter in Orange County, and so people who are at the shelter to escape their abuser, and then they come to us for help with restraining orders, or, for example, they need to get divorced from their abuser, and they also want to keep custody of their child. And so we represent women like that on a regular basis, and really helping them rebuild their lives safely away from their abuser, where they don't fear that person coming after them, and they have the tools they need to, start over with a clean slate.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's got to be a tough situation, especially if you're in a domestic violence situation and they're the breadwinner.
Yeah, that's one type of abuse. There's physical abuse, there's mental abuse, there's also financial abuse. So we see financial abuse sometimes looks like the abuser, who's the breadwinner, is controlling all of the money. So the person who is in that situation is not able to access resources to get out of that situation. And so sometimes they have to just leave with the clothes on their back or a little bag of stuff, and then they have to start over. So accessing government benefits, being able to access an attorney to get spousal support or child support is really, really important, because the abuser is holding the finances really tight as a mechanism of control and to keep someone locked into that situation.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about control in that. I heard this thing one time talking about scarcity is like the number one mechanism of control. So if I make money scarce to you, right now I'm in control, because it is something you need, especially in this society, in order to survive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, good. You had mentioned a lot of barriers, right? And I agree. And I don't know that I have the certificates to ever disagree, but just looking at it, having lived a little bit of life and decently educated, and the law is complex for sure. And you mentioned barriers, and even being a lawyer, the law can be complex. And, and why do you think that is, or what do you think of the origination point of the Constitution and the laws of the land, and where we are now? How, 'cause I consider it a gap, and maybe I'm wrong, but, there seems to be an understanding gap to a degree along with the barriers that you're talking about. I'm just curious, your opinion and your expertise on how we got there.
Yeah, I mean the Constitution and the foundation of our laws was created, a while back by wealthy, educated landowners. But the Constitution applies to everyone in the United States, including low-income, not well-educated renters, right? And so because there's this disparity between who wrote the laws and who they apply to, they were not written for everyone to be able to understand them. Today we always talk about, when we're putting out materials, and like at Public Law Center, when we're writing to our clients, we write at a 7th grade reading level, right? We don't write in legalese. We don't write in weird legal terminology. We try to speak to our clients in a way that they understand. But if you take a look at the United States Constitution, it is filled with legalese. It is not written for every single person to understand. And that's from the origination of this country's laws to today. Even laws that passed last year are filled with legalese and just not made to be transparent and understandable by the average person. And so, attorneys can serve as that interpreter, translating the legal words into plain language. But really, my opinion is that the move should be for our laws to be transparent and understandable by all. Laws should be able to be written at a 7th grade reading level, and all of us could then really understand what they mean and how they apply.
Yeah, legalese and Shakespeare combined. When I look at the Constitution, I'm like, I don't know, but yeah. I mean, it's interesting, because in order for it needs to be assimilatable, if that's a word, right? You need to be able to assimilate the information and write it, like you said, with the purpose and intention that another individual is going to understand this, and the majority of the population is going to understand this. The youth 16, 17, 18, even though they juvenile, the law very much applies to someone under the age of 18. And so on that topic, at what point should an individual, or what age, start becoming familiar with the law and start having access to it, like you had mentioned, to be able to not be effect of the system, but benefit from it?
I mean, I think the earlier the better. We don't teach civics in most places, but it's so important. Understanding your basic rights, whether that's, most people are renters, but do they understand their renters' rights? What are their protections from their landlord? What can they say? What can they do to help themselves? And I think you should learn this. If you're 14, 15, 16, it's time. We do workshops for high school students on occasion, or do trainings so that we can spread that knowledge, because it is so important and you need it for your whole life. So the earlier you learn it, the better.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, I wish I would have understood it a lot better, a lot earlier in life. And in terms of like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and it's an interesting thing to look at, because these are universal and these are for every individual on planet Earth, and they're innate. They're not given. I mean, they are given. Well, what am I trying to say? Someone doesn't give you the right? You receive the rights like the laws of the land because simply you are born. And so how do you see the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the law, no matter where anyone is in the world, how do they correlate?
It's a good question. The universal human rights are kind of the building block for every country to individually build their laws. And so, we've been talking today about equal protection, and you have to say that the right exists, but then you have to build the laws in your particular society to make that a reality. And so the two things, the Declaration of Human Rights and the laws of the land, are really tied together. And without the belief in the universal human rights, the laws of the land can be misguided.
Right. And have you seen? Because this is my perspective. And we've talked about justice and equal justice, right? Whether it be the laws of the land or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, either of them are not held. It does happen in the United States. We talk about one of the hot topics. We find a tremendous amount of organizations in the areas, child sex trafficking or slave labor and things of that nature. And so I'm wondering if there's a slippage in one, like the laws of the land. Does it typically mean or is it an indication that probably the Universal Declaration or people's human rights are also being violated?
Yeah, I think that that's the case. A place where the laws of the land are not being upheld, it is very unlikely then that their human rights are also being upheld. We work with trafficking victims typically on their immigration cases, helping them stay in the United States. If you've been trafficked here from somewhere else, then you can potentially stay here. And it's really important to be able to enforce, their immigration rights because their human rights were already violated.
Right.
And so it's one of the small remedies we have for an individual who's gone through that kind of trauma.
Yeah, will you share a little bit more on that? So if someone is brought over, illegally crossed, but in a trafficking, whether it be sex trafficking or whatever you want to call it, right? And so you have the immigration laws as you're talking about, and so now what do they do in terms of that?
Yeah, and some people, it depends on how they were trafficked, but if they don't want to go back to the country of origin, they might have been here for 10 years before their trafficker got caught, and this is where their life is and they want to stay. Or they were in a really terrible situation in their country of origin, which is how they got trafficked in the first place. So if you want to stay here, if you've been part of a trafficking situation, especially if you've been helping the prosecution against the trafficker, you potentially can get a visa to stay in the United States. And that lets you rebuild your life and lets you, you can be free of your abuser, of your trafficker, and then you can try to start over. And that is the small bit of repair that, the law provides. Obviously on the criminal side, hopefully they're going after the traffickers, but on our end, we're helping the people who have experienced that abuse.
Yeah, that's incredible information to know because, I don't know if you can validate, I'm sure it happens a lot.
It happens more than you think. It really does. There's a lot of different types of trafficking, but there's sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and it happens everywhere. But it happens in this country more than you think.
Yeah, I would agree. I definitely got a taste of reality when I started hosting the show and brought people on, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm pretty aware, but I had no idea that in our backyard, let alone across the world and in every nation, just about.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So share with us, with the organization, moving forward, is there anything you guys are working on, or what are the goals and the purposes? Obviously, you're doing incredible work. And so just curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really stressful time for our client population. The economy is rough, and so people have less money than ever. And so we're just trying to continue providing as many services as possible and empowering people to be able to deal with problems as they come up in their lives. No one comes to our office because they're having a great day. Everyone's coming to our office because they're having probably the worst day of their year. And so we are trying to, set people on a path where they can be, back having a better day and a better year. And so our organization is just, we try to expand our services as much as possible, make as wide of a reach as possible, which is why I'm happy to be here on the show and talk about our work. And, always financial support is much appreciated because that's where our funding comes from as a nonprofit. And that's what we need to be able to reach more people.
Absolutely. And how does someone reach if they find themselves in a situation where they do need your services? How would they reach out?
Yeah, so if you're in Orange County and you need our help, I recommend you can check out our website, publiclawcenter.org, and then you can either reach us by telephone is probably the best way to reach us. And so our phone number is on our website, but you can see all of our different practice areas to make sure that the issue that you have is one that we assist with. But there are civil legal aids in every state in the country, and so anyone in the United States who has an issue can find an organization similar to ours that provides free services.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. And so as we get to the close of the interview, we always ask our guests this final question, and that is, what is your favorite human right and why?
Well, I will say, I think as a lawyer, I love the right to a trial. I think that was a little bit also my motivation for going to law school, and the idea that you get to fight publicly for your rights is one that I just love. So
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure, and I definitely learned a tremendous amount. And for your work, I mean, it really says a lot about you as an individual and your organization, that your purpose filled is to help others who are in need and may otherwise not have ever been able to get out of a situation that was horrific. So I appreciate all the work that you and your organization does.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, well, that's our show for this week. I hope you learned a tremendous amount of information, and please do, if you are in Orange County or any state area in the United States, even across the world, make sure that you find out, do you have access to representation, to getting more education about the law? And as Tyler mentioned, you want to start educating yourself as early as you can about the laws of your land, about human rights. These are your rights. You are protected by all of them. And until next time, I will see you.